Good evening. Welcome to another Bold Blind Beauty Up in the Air webinar session. My name is Stephanie McCoy, the founder of Bold Blind Beauty, an advocacy platform that demystifies blindness through storytelling. We are so happy to have you join us for the second segment of How Employable Am I? 3 Keys to Success. Second key, getting the job. This session is being recorded with captions and will be uploaded to YouTube in a couple of weeks. All registrants will receive a free resource guide by email following the webinar. I'm going to go over some housekeeping tips just to ensure that everybody has an enjoyable experience. We're asking all of our attendees to remain on mute while we're going through this session. We're going to have a Q&A at the end of the session in or around 10 minutes. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat feature, and we will get to those answers at the end of the session. So I hope that covers everything. I'm going to turn this over to Jason, who will take it from here. Jason, you're up.
All right, welcome everybody to our second webinar on employability. At our first webinar, which I also had the pleasure of moderating, we talked about the importance of using systems and methods to tackle issues of employability. We defined systems and methods as looking at employability through the lens of 3 major keys, and then using smaller related subtasks as a means to achieve each key. The focus of our first webinar was on the first key to employment, which is the honest self-assessment. Some of the subtasks for achieving the honest self-assessment were learning about things like our skills, interests, values, and personality characteristics. Remember that the honest self-assessment is the foundational piece for the subsequent keys. There are no shortcuts. If you haven't done the honest self-assessment, be sure to do that. It's not just something we do once and then quit, but rather something we do periodically. The focus of our second webinar this evening is going to be on the second key to employment, which is getting the job. Now, I have some very knowledgeable panelists who are going to help me fill out today's discussion. Let's give a hearty welcome back to Yokasta and Matthew, and a hearty welcome aboard to Ken. Gang, if you could introduce yourselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yokasta Urena. I am a teacher for the blind and visually impaired in New York City. I'm also an adjunct professor at Illinois State University, and I am legally blind due to Leber's congenital amaurosis. I have pretty good functional vision, but you don't want me to drive you anywhere. I am also the parent of a 19-year-old son who is legally blind with Leber's as well. And thank you for having me.
Hello, I am Ken Meeker. I am the owner of Vitality Career Coaching, a boutique leadership, career, and executive coaching business in Arizona. I am low vision as well, and I also should not be driving, so I can relate to that. As I jokingly tell people, if you ever see me behind the wheel of a car, that means there's something really bad behind me, and so you want to go in the same direction. But I also have worked as a career specialist for the Foundation for Blind Children in their vocational rehabilitation program, and I do a significant amount of work in terms of advocacy for diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and justice work. And I'm happy to be here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Matthew, and I am for Bold Blind Beauty. I am a high school senior, and I have a visual impairment. I had a brain tumor and lost my vision, but I'm happy to be here as well.
And I'm Jason Perry, the moderator. I am totally blind from birth. I'm a general practice attorney. I also have 10 years experience as a drug and rehab counselor. And hey, I'm not writing with any of my panelists, although I would hire any of them to do many different types of jobs. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so let's begin here. So some of the things we're going to talk about today as a means to achieve getting the job, some of the subtasks, include things like digital assets, job applications, job interviews, and different types of working environments, namely telework versus going into the office. Ken, let's start with digital assets. Can you tell us what digital assets are and why they're important?
Absolutely. So digital assets are basically having digital copies of your resume. Sometimes, depending upon your industry, it can also be referred to as a CV. Having them drafted, ready to go. Also having a personal summary and a cover letter are also really good things to have drafted and ready to go. A couple of quick notes: always tailor your resume or your CV and your cover letter to the specifics of the job. And when you have them drafted, ready to go, it is a lot easier to make those changes to tailor it to the job itself. But it makes applying for jobs a heck of a lot easier. That is, in a nutshell, what a digital asset is.
Yeah, I agree, Ken. Digital assets are really important, especially, to be able to email them and to upload them to servers. That's how people are recruiting nowadays. And one of the things that's really important for a digital asset, I think, is work samples. Like you were saying, your curriculum vitae, cover letters, and being able to tailor those. Really
Absolutely.
vital points.
Absolutely.
So at the end of our presentation, everybody who participated is going to get a handout, and we discussed the various types of resume formats, how to build a resume and cover letter and to compile your digital assets. All right, let's move on to job applications. Many job applications are in digital format, some are still in paper format. But regardless of the format, applications can be really, really challenging for someone who is blind or low vision. Things don't always work the way that you expect. One of the things I always tell people is to read the instructions carefully and answer the exact questions asked and be precise. Yokasta, you were just recently hired for a job, and I was wondering if you could tell us about the job application process that you went through and any successes and challenges.
Yes. So yes, I was recently hired for a position in early childhood, specifically working in early intervention. I would say that the first step to the job application process is knowing or narrowing down what type of job you actually want to do. Because if you are in a field like mine, where it's education, and you qualify for many different types of positions, the job application process may vary. Some may be still, you might email a district and submit your application that way, or you may go on sites like Indeed, or, not that they're sponsoring us, but sites like Indeed or Jobcast, and submit your application that way. Once you've narrowed down what type of job it is that you want to do, then really putting in the keywords of that job in the site that you're looking, for example, in Indeed, will eliminate a lot of time. If you narrow it down to specific keywords and reading the job description so that you know how to answer the questions that might follow.
Yeah, it goes back to really giving them the information that they want in a concise format.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, you recently completed a job application for the position you were hired for. And I'm wondering if you had any technology issues or accessibility challenges with that application.
It can be confusing. I had some challenges with the application because sometimes, in my case, I found my specific job through a post on Indeed. Indeed gives you the option, for example, of going directly to applying to the site. So the site of the organization may look very different. They may not be necessarily in compliance with the use of voiceover, in which case, if you run into that issue and you're a voiceover reader, you may still want to send an application to their HR department directly. In my case, I read print. So I was able to navigate the site and upload the information they requested, but I could see how someone who might be a voiceover user would have trouble with the way that the site was designed. The HR information, however, was on the page. So it would have been easy for me to contact them directly.
And if someone is having issues with an application because it's not working with a screen reader or voiceover, what advice would you give them?
I say to contact the HR department directly. Many times, at least in my field, Ken might be able to speak in a broader sense, but in the field of education, directors are used to receiving applications from prospective teachers. So it's not out of the usual for them to receive an email from a prospective employee. Ken might be able to speak to other areas, but that's what I would have done had I not been able to access the application.
Ken, would you have any advice for applicants who are having accessibility challenges completing an application?
Oh gosh, do I. So, so first is if you are a screen reader user, be prepared to encounter some issues. Indeed is notorious for not working for screen readers. And the reason being is it depends on the browser that you're using, what screen reader you're using, which version of software you're using. All of that could wreak havoc on job searches. And I don't want to single out Indeed. It applies to all of them. And so be prepared to experience issues on websites. Doesn't matter if it's a Google search, if it's Indeed, if it's just be prepared. Hopefully you won't, but having another type of browser, so like if you're normally a Chrome user, also having Microsoft Edge available to use it as well, because sometimes it will work in one but not in another, and just be prepared for it. And also, if you are a Windows system user, try Narrator instead of JAWS and see if one works versus the other not working. Also, a bit of advice for applying directly through websites or like Indeed or LinkedIn, using their platform versus going directly to a site. I always recommend going directly to a business's or an organization's website and applying directly, because I have seen what it looks like when you use like Indeed or LinkedIn's platform to submit your application, and it is completely insufficient of what you need to provide to an organization. Because I know people on the HR side who have sent me copies of what they receive. Always go direct to the organization to apply. Always.
I'm sitting here like a sponge soaking up all this wonderful advice from Yokasta and Ken. Wow, I wish I had some of these tips when I was in the job hunting process. So we've covered a lot of ground on applications. And I think it's just a matter of, being prepared to, expecting problems and finding solutions around them, trying different technologies, trying different browsers, and, as a last case resort, asking for help. Most job applications have a contact person that can be called or emailed in a last ditch effort. All right, let's move on to job interviews. Ken, what you want to give us sort of an overview of, what a general interview process consists of?
I was actually hoping you'd go to Yokasta first because she just had the experience. And so I'm actually looking forward to her take on it. Are you comfortable going first?
Yeah, Yokasta, you just got hired, so it does make sense to go to you on this.
Oh my goodness. So first of all, as all of you know, looking for a job is a full-time job. And so when you you send out emails and you send out your resumes, you might have a time period where you hear from no one. And then everyone comes out of the woodworks and wants to see you and interview you. That's the moment for people with disabilities that can become very anxiety producing, because you have to start planning your route, how you get to your possible new interview experience. I think the interview starts before you get there. I think when you're interviewing, you have to plan ahead, plan different ways to get to the interview site. I believe that hiring managers are looking at your body language. If you arrive sweating because you had no idea where you were going and you're late, you're already giving information to your prospective employer about the quality of professional that you will be for them. So my interview really starts way before I get there. I try to get to the interview about half an hour to 45 minutes before, just in case I run into any issues. Now, the interview process. So going back to the application, I disclose, this is a very personal decision that no one can tell you. You know yourself if you feel comfortable. I disclose that I'm visually impaired, especially because I work with young children, and it's going to be evident that I'm visually impaired. So when I'm going to an interview site, I use my cane if I have to, but if I don't have to, I don't use it, which is my typical usage of my long white cane. Sometimes I need it, sometimes I don't. I don't change that. When I walk into the interview and we start to talk and they ask me, tell me about yourself, that is one of the first things I say. I am Latina. I have a son who's visually impaired. I live in New York. I became interested in the field due to my experience with my son. And by the way, I'm visually impaired as well. And so please stop me, Jason, if you'd like me to stop there, or if I should continue on and talk about being prepared for the questions that follow.
Yeah, I was interested in how you went about preparing to answer the questions that you were asked for this particular interview. Could you give us an example of a few questions that they asked you and how you handled them?
Sure. So when I disclose, I've said this before to colleagues, disclosure isn't just saying I'm visually impaired, but it's the body language that you use when you're saying it, your tone, the tone in your voice. I'm not apologetic about being visually impaired. I state it very matter-of-factly, and I'm prepared for questions related to my field. For example, one of the questions was, how can we assist you? If you become our employee, can you give us an example of an area where you need help or where you would benefit from help? And I said, sure. For example, if we are going to the park, I require that I have one adult for every 2 children, because I want to make sure that every child is accounted for. And outdoors, my vision is very poor. So I need assistance when we go outside. I need to know what your fire drill is like. What are the streets that we would have to go to if we have to exit the building? I really do well with Mac products. This is just my personal preference. If you can offer that, that would be great for me. And please don't write anything in pencil because I will not be able to read it. Use a Sharpie or a dark pen. And the employer is, in my experience, are typically very satisfied that I can answer their questions in a quick way and without feeling ashamed or, being nervous about answering those questions. They're all legitimate questions when you're working with children.
So, Yokasta, I see two major points that you're touching on here. One is whether or not to disclose the disability on the application versus the interview. And then the second is, how do you reassure the employer that your disability is not a barrier at the interview?
Yes, and I disclose, it's my personal preference to disclose on the application. It's just my personal philosophy is, if you don't want to hire me because I have a disability, then I most likely don't want to work for you to begin with.
And I would agree with that philosophy wholeheartedly.
Yeah, that's just my personal preference, right? And the other is my resume speaks for itself. If I'm being called for the interview, is because I possess some of the qualities that they're looking for. Now I have to deliver during the interview process. And that's where we have to come out of our shell and not feel as if we are less than a perfect candidate. I'm at the interview because they are considering me. So I just, in general, I tend to disclose, be very concrete, give them examples of what it is that I need. I need dark pens. I need access to accessibility on my devices if I'm going to be writing notes. What is my preferred method, for example, Mac? And how can they assist me by providing an extra hand during outdoor activities? Those are 3 concrete things they can do that are very doable for the organization.
I work for myself as a general practice attorney, and one of the common concerns that I get from clients is, hey, if I sign on with you, how are you going to perform the job? Are you a good attorney? And so one of the things I have to do is to actually show them, give them a demonstration as to how, I conduct research, how I get around, how I travel, how I would coordinate court appointments for their scheduling and so forth. A lot of it comes down to being able to demonstrate how you would perform, and that your blindness or visual impairment is not going to hinder you in your job. If anything, it's an asset because you're actually embracing it, and you're more flexible because of it. You've had to adapt and plan. Matthew, I'm curious, you've done several internships in the past. Would you have any advice for people as to whether they should or should not disclose, or factors they should consider when we're talking about the application versus the interview?
I'm sorry, on my end, it broke up a little bit. Were you asking me or Matthew?
I was going to bring Matthew in on this point to see if he had any advice in terms of whether or not to disclose disability issues on the application or in the interview.
Okay, so would you like me to speak about the topic?
Yes. So I was wondering
Yeah.
if you had any suggestions for people to consider whenever they were going to disclose or not disclose their visual impairment,
So,
on an application or in an interview.
right, of course. I mean, usually I would agree that, in some cases there are times when you don't want to, disclose your information until you get to know them a little more. But I would say go for it, like embrace your uniqueness. Sometimes it's a good thing to say that, hey, like I'm visually impaired and I'm different, but I could still do the task. It's a good thing to be, like to make an impact on the employer. That way the employer goes home thinking, wait a second, that person, I really enjoyed their personality and the uniqueness.
Now, that's at the interview. Have you ever
Yeah.
disclosed your disability on a job application or
On
an
the
internship
application?
application? Yeah.
Yes, I have.
And have you found that works for you or doesn't work for you?
So I feel like it works at the job application as well. I feel like whoever's reading that, they're like, okay, wow, it's quite unique. You want to give a story though, a story along with the disclosing your whatever your disability.
So, Ken, I think everybody's in agreement that disclosure at the interview is definitely the way to go. I'm wondering if you have any suggestions as to whether or not to disclose on the application.
So I have quite a few thoughts here. First and foremost, never apply to a job that you're not qualified for. You need to be qualified for the job to do all of the essential job duties. Even if it requires a reasonable accommodation, that's okay. But you have to be able to do the essential job duties first and foremost. Don't apply to a job you can't do. With regard to the application, it honestly, it depends. With increasing frequency, if your employer receives some sort of federal funding, there must be a mechanism for you to disclose without it going to the people that are doing the hiring. There's a federal mandate when it comes to that. So sometimes you have the opportunity to disclose without it going to the people that are doing the hiring. And if that's the case, yes, absolutely disclose, because it doesn't affect who you're going in front of. If you're going to need a reasonable accommodation with any part of the application process or interview process, I suggest disclosing, because you need to in order to get the accommodation.
Very good point, because an employer can't accommodate what they don't know.
And they don't have to.
They don't have to, absolutely.
And so with regard to disclosure, it's always a personal choice. And I think that's really, really, really important to focus on. It is always a personal choice. However, if you know you're going to need a reasonable accommodation in the job or at any point during the interview process, disclose when it's appropriate. When it's appropriate to reveal that you're going to need that reasonable accommodation, I believe that is the most appropriate time to have that discussion. And so, because everyone is different, everyone's needs are different. I do not believe in a one-size-fits-all approach to anything. But if you need an accommodation, do what's going to serve you the best. And so know what your rights and responsibilities are under the ADA. Be informed. Know your rights. That is so important for you to be able to self-advocate. And far too often, job seekers can put an undue responsibility on the employer, thinking it's purely their responsibility to know what the rights, what they can and can't do are. Truth is that's not the case. A lot of hiring managers have no idea what they can ask you. And so let's say you go into a job interview and you're using your cane. Obviously, they can see it. Or if you have a guide dog, there's something there to address. So address it, get it over with. Don't make that the focus of the interview. Address it immediately, be done with it. An employer is always prohibited from asking about disability. They cannot ask you about it. You have to initiate the conversation. So don't focus on the disability, don't focus on the condition, focus on how you're qualified to do the job. That's what you focus on. Don't focus on the disability, don't focus on your condition, focus on the job.
Ken, I agree wholeheartedly. And one of the things I advocate is a disability 101 statement that you can readily give off to an employer, and it focuses not on the disability. The disability is an incidental part of who you are, but it focuses on your qualifications and skills and how you would get around disability related barriers.
Absolutely. Be prepared to answer those questions. How are you going to do the job?
And be prepared to show them, as Yokasta and I were discussing earlier.
If you have to, yeah. So on that note, there's something that this is where self-advocacy comes in. If you're going to be asked to perform a task, I always recommend, do you ask this of every applicant? That is such an important question. If they are not asking for every applicant to perform the same thing, it is against the law, point blank under the ADA. So, and it's a simple way of asking, do you ask everyone to perform that they can do this? How you address it, how you do it matters, absolutely. But just because you have a disability should not be indicative that you can't do the job.
And Ken, just to follow up on that statement, I have a great example that is at that cusp, right? I was asked how to give an example of my behavior management strategies, because I work with children who are on the autism spectrum and are infants and toddlers. Now, from the surface, we could say this is a question that's related to the job. It's related to how is this candidate, does she have the philosophy that we need for our organization? But I could also see it as they want to know, how will I visually manage behavior in a classroom? What is my answer going to say?
Nuance is so important there.
Yes, right. So the delivery of the way that the person asked the question was what I was listening to.
Absolutely. Yep.
And I always look at interview questions. They can be asked in so many different ways, but interviewers ask you questions for a reason. They're trying to elicit some type of information. And if you can figure out and nuance what that information is, you can give them a concise answer that is really going to impress them.
Absolutely. Never avoid a question just because you don't like it, but always answer it in the way that is not, if it's iffy, at best, because they cannot ask you directly about your disability. They can't. But not everybody knows that. That's taking the assumption that everybody knows, employment law, which I guarantee they don't, or that they know the ADA and what they can ask and can't ask. People could ask, what's with the cane? They can't ask you that, but I guarantee people do. So
a lot of people ask questions that are perhaps illegal. Now, Ken, do you have any advice for people in terms of handling questions that are illegal or on the borderline?
Absolutely. So first, ask the interviewer, are you asking this question of all applicants? Because they have to be asking what they're asking you of everybody.
And if they say no, what would you recommend?
I would go with, how come? Because the truth is do you want to work for somebody that is going to approach employment from that angle? I know I wouldn't, and I wouldn't recommend anybody else do either, because that person is ignorant on the law and you have recourse if necessary. But I don't like to go that direction. I just say, all right, this person is clearly violating my rights and I can look for another job. Or you can ask, is this question being asked of all people being interviewed? How is this question relevant to the position? Or is there a reason in particular I'm being asked this question? There's lots of different ways of handling that to try and get to the underlying root of the question without being combative as well, because that's the last thing you want to do. But you have a right to advocate for yourself and understand what is the relevance of the question, because you're there for a job, not to talk about your disability.
So the disability is just part of the package. It's an incidental part of who we are, and we have ways of getting around the barriers that our disability might cause, and we have to demonstrate that to an interviewer.
Exactly. Focus on why you can do the job.
And it's all about not burning bridges.
Absolutely. Yeah, you never want to be combative. You don't want to be adversarial to the interview. But when you are faced with that type of question, you have to be prepared how to answer it in a way that is not aggressive, where you're not trying to fight with the interviewer, but you have the right to ask, well, how is this relevant to the interview or to the job if it feels something completely off base, if it's not directly tied, because you're there for a job. And that is, I personally have never had that happen, just FYI. I've never been asked, well, something that's off the cuff, but it does happen, and you need to be prepared for when it does, and be like, you know what, I might need to use a screen reader, but I am great at solving problems. And I guarantee that you don't have, or you likely don't have, somebody else on your team who has my problem solving ability. And so my angle at problem solving is something you currently don't have in this organization. That's where your value is added. That's what you want to talk about.
I always tell them, hey, I use a screen reader, but a seeing person uses a monitor. Really,
Yep.
When you get right down to it, they're two pieces of technology. What's the difference fundamentally?
You're better at proofreading. That's the difference.
Well, there you go. So it's all about framing your disability or your so-called disability as an asset.
Yes, absolutely. Because I guarantee you're a better proofreader. I guarantee you're a better proofreader because you have to hear it.
And to that point, and I think that when people who are blind or visually impaired are working in the humanities fields where we are responsible for other people, we could be additionally scrutinized, because how will you handle managing staff if you have low vision or you're blind? And that's where I kill them with nerdiness.
Yeah.
I go off on, well, if you're dealing with behavior management, then you're really dealing with anticipation, and on and on and on, because I know, going back to your initial point, I'm applying for a job that I'm qualified to do. Exactly. So I make that shift from the vision to the practical of the job, of what will I be doing very quickly.
Yeah.
I don't sit on the visual impairment piece.
And then why you are the best candidate.
Exactly. Focus on why you are
the ideal fit.
Yes, absolutely. And it works every time.
Because when interviewers question you, they're looking for, they might be looking for knowledge, they might be looking for skill, or they might be looking for whether you're a good fit with, are you a team player? Do you believe in organizational values and those sorts of things?
Yep. And there's so many advantages to having a disability, honestly, that are that focus on what you can do that other people can't. And I firmly believe that there is a huge advantage to the problem solving and the having to figure out how to do the same things everybody else has to do, just differently. That's a huge selling point that you can talk about and say, well, I can't see, I don't do it that way, but I can do it this way.
And I can do it 3 or 4 other ways too.
Yes, exactly. Talk about why you're an advantage to the organization.
So Ken and Yokasta, things are so much better today than they were 15 or 20 years ago. Were I having this discussion with you, say, in the 80s or 90s, I would advise not disclosing disability until you absolutely had to, when you're face to face, and just surprise them. And then, give your disability 101 statement. But things are so much better now that I agree. I think it's a good idea to disclose at the earliest possible point, particularly if you're going to need an accommodation for either the application or the interview.
Absolutely. I agree. If you go back to pre-ADA, it's a whole other world. So.
And I grew up in part of that world, and it's definitely not a world I want to go back to. Well, awesome. So we've covered a lot of ground in terms of interviewing as a blind person. So let's just shift our focus here a bit to different types of working environments. With the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen a lot of increases in terms of opportunities to telework versus going into the office. And I'm wondering, do you have any insight as to the pros and cons, either panelist, Yokasta, Ken, or Matthew? Do you have any insight as to, some of the pros and cons of teleworking versus going into the office?
I think in general, I'm a very social person. Not that you can see that right now, right? But I'm an extremely social person.
I would never have guessed.
Never. I mean, come on. During the pandemic, I had to make a very quick shift onto using technology so that I could teach remotely. I think when you are a visually impaired or blind professional, you have to be open to making changes and shifting the way that we work, because the world is unpredictable, and what you may have been doing for the last 5 years may not work tomorrow. So that was a very big realization for me, having to move to remote work. I had to learn how to use a magnification and Zoom and Google Meets, which I never, ever used before. So I would say to job seekers, be open to doing things in different ways. And I even started to assess making a shift to more screen reading softwares, because I am in front of a screen for so many hours. I am very happy to be going back to in-person work. In-person is right for me because I really enjoy that community feeling of being in a building with people that are like-minded. But if you are not like me and you want to stay remote, then you've got to stay on top of technology. And as Jason said at the beginning, be ready to reassess yourself and your skills, be open to changing and learning new ways to do your job so that you can continue to do it well.
One of the things I like about telework is not having to worry about how I'm going to get there, crossing busy intersections, dealing with late buses or bad weather. But I am a very social person, and teleworking over these past couple of years has really made me think, oh man, the sense of community just isn't the same when you're teleworking. The sense of community and camaraderie.
Yeah. So I actually, because this is such a huge thing right now, telework, hybrid work, and then there's a lot of mandates for companies to go back into the office no matter what. I sought some input from various people out in the world that are employers that do a significant amount of hiring, that are very much on board with hiring people that have disabilities. One of them being a senior level at the Foundation for Blind Children here in Arizona. And obviously they don't have anything against blind people or people that are low vision, seeking input on this very specific subject. And the direct feedback I have is, don't ever go into an interview saying, I need to work remote. Because no matter what, it raises a red flag as to why. So if you need to work remotely, you better be prepared to say why right at the onset, but it also is just a red flag to the employer. No matter how much they might want to hire you, the interview is not the time to have that conversation. And that is pretty much a direct quote from somebody who works with a lot of people that are blind or low vision. That being said, if you need to work remotely and it's a possibility, be prepared to explain why, because there are very valid reasons as to why it might be an advantage. As you touched on, Jason, transportation, the reliability of transportation is a huge issue. Time saved, productivity, all those things go into play.
Some jobs cannot be done remotely. And so if you go into an interview saying, I need remote work, or you put that on a job application that you need remote work, it shows rigidity. It shows that you're not flexible. And so if you really need remote work, at least part of the time, to me, the time to address that is once you're hired, and then you can start requesting accommodations. I think we've covered a lot of ground in terms of getting the job.
Jason, can one last comment about the remote versus in person?
Oh, absolutely.
My last comment about that is that although remote may seem like a very comfortable way of sustaining a job, and sometimes it works beautifully. Depending on the field that you're in, you may actually be losing skills. So if you are in a field like mine, which is education, and remote work is no longer an option 2 years down the road, your employer may ask you, how will you work directly with staff? You've been doing remote work for 4 years. Are you prepared to supervise X number of people in person? You may have all the qualifications, but now there's a 4-year gap where you have not had direct contact with managing people. So consider
Point.
field, I would say.
And you may also be losing the opportunity to attend staff meetings and really influence the direction that the organization goes.
Those are
So
both
there's
great
definite
points.
cost to telework.
Yep.
But I'm glad it's an option, at least some of the time, because it can really be beneficial, like if the weather's bad or your transportation doesn't show up on a particular day. Well, gang, we have covered a lot of ground today. And I think now would be a good time to turn it over for some questions and answers.
Can I ask my question?
Absolutely.
Okay, I wasn't sure. So this is my first attendance of, I just was recently visually impaired and I just recently joined a BPN. So I didn't get to do the self-assessment. But I do know that, I mean, I would like to go back and do that, but I do know that I'm really having a hard time with making a cover letter or a summary statement, trying to encapsulate this new aspect of my professional presentation. And I'm really struggling with, first of all, I love that you guys are talking about how it's okay and blah, 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 but how do you approach crafting that statement, the 101 statement?
I have an excellent example on the handout that you'll be receiving upon conclusion of this presentation. And it's the functional statement that I use as an attorney who is blind. And so you can sort of see what other people have done and then model your statement around, what your skills and abilities are. The other thing is I believe that the honest self-assessment materials are going to be available on Bold Blind Beauty's website at some point. So you'll have access to those. I'm sure we can arrange to get those sent out to you.
Excuse me, Marie, this is Steph. So happy to hear that you're continuing to push forward, even though you find yourself in this new situation, because it can be so scary. So kudos to you for doing that. I just wanted to dovetail off of what Jason just said. There is a link in the materials that you're going to receive after this event. There is a link to the prior materials that Jason had created on how to do the self-assessment. And we also have the prior webinar for how to do the self-assessment on our YouTube channel as well.
Okay, thank you. May I just follow up with one more question?
Sure.
So I can't imagine doing an interview right now. I can't even be in a group setting and tell my story without crying. So there's this big grief thing that I'm dealing with, and I'm wondering if anybody else has that issue. And I mean, I'm in therapy, but will this go away? This grief that comes up unexpectedly.
So can I take this one?
Absolutely, Ken.
Okay, so Marie, if it's recent vision loss, number one, kudos for you going into therapy. That is what it has saved my life. I'm very open about that. Therapy is one of the best things that anybody can ever do, gifts they can never give themselves. There's a mourning process that you go through when you lose your sight as an adult. As I did. I don't want to speak for Steph, but I know that she and I have had a lot of conversations about this stuff. And so there's a process, and I'm happy to speak with you, outside of this as well. But take the time you need in order to take care of you first, because you have to heal and feel ready to get back out there. And it takes time. And so give yourself that time. Be kind to yourself first and foremost. Don't push yourself to a point where you are not dealing with the loss in and of itself and taking and exercising the self-care you need to process it. That's so important. I don't know, Steph, I think you would have some amazing words to say right now.
Oh my gosh, yes. Actually, this is one of the things I'm very passionate about. I'm very open about my sight loss. I lost my sight when I was in my mid 40s. I wasn't prepared for it, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to turn. I tried therapy, but I wanted someone who understood the experience of sight loss. And so I was on a panel a couple years ago, and I talked about mental health and how I struggled with it in regards to my sight loss. And there were a number of people that asked me after the end of that session if I knew of any resources where they could go to, get information about mental health as it relates to sight loss. And unfortunately, at that time, there wasn't many places. But now I actually met a woman about a week and a half ago who is a therapist. She herself is also visually impaired. She's been visually impaired from birth. So she understands that in addition to the mental health component. But you are not alone. You are definitely not alone. And as Ken said, be kind to yourself, allow yourself some time to grieve. And what helped me was actually befriending other blind people and allowing them to mentor me. And once I was able to see that they were able to continue living their lives, not just live, but thrive, flourish, that helped me tremendously.
Steph, can I jump in here for what?
Sure, absolutely.
So Marie, I cannot relate to your experience because I have been visually impaired since birth. I've been legally blind my whole life. What I can relate to is the feeling of feeling different. When I was younger, I felt very different than my peers because I was visually impaired and they wouldn't let me forget it. So once I realized I was different than my peers, it was very difficult for me. The person that you have before you is not who I was when I was a teenager. I was very shy, very introverted, very insecure. And there came a point where I started to see that everybody struggles with something. Some people struggle with an illness and their older age. Some people struggle with a visual impairment, such as myself, from the very beginning. And other people are just not nice people. So I'll keep it PC for Steph's sake. I'll keep it PC. Some people are just not nice, and there's nothing they can do about it. That's just the way they are. What I can say to you is take your time embracing this new reality, and don't feel that you have to fit in anybody's box. You are an individual in your own journey. You are on no one's timeline. And just a very direct, just to address what you mentioned about the cover letter, I'd be happy to continue speaking with you. If you want to connect with me, I'll drop my information. The cover letter and the resume is about your skills. You have not changed as a professional. Maybe certain things in terms of the way you will do the job have changed, but your knowledge and your brain has not changed. You're still the same person inside. You might just have to learn different skills, that's all. But take your time, and you're on no one's timeline.
Thank you.
I just got my email into the chat if you would like to connect afterwards as well.
And do you mind if I add anything too?
Oh, go ahead, Matthew.
Okay, so I lost my vision just recently. When I was 15, I lost my vision, and before I lost my vision, I thought I wanted to become a doctor. Now, ever since then, I was like, oh geez, why did it have to be me? And I was thinking the same things that you might have been thinking. I felt very depressed. I was like, why did it have to be me? But through that vision loss, sure, there was lots of tough times, but I think that what I was able to find was truly you have to find your interests. some people it's hard for them to like find the true interest. And I know I've heard a lot of people who they've been working their whole lives and they don't like what they're doing. But the important thing is you have fun with what you're doing. You have passion for what you have interest for whatever you're doing, and that's the most important thing. Despite like having struggles, despite having issues with your disability, you might say, oh wow, my disability is a barricade for having success. It's okay. As long as you feel like you're having fun, that you feel that you're not forced to do it, that's the best thing, is in my opinion.
Really good points, gang. Marie, it's Jason here, the moderator, and I would be happy to speak with you individually as well in terms of the honest self-assessment, any grieving issues that you're having. I've been blind since birth as well, so I can't relate to sight loss, but I can relate to becoming diabetic as an adult and all the changes I had to make in my life to accommodate that. So loss is part of the natural order of things, but it isn't necessarily pleasant. But things get a whole lot better, once you meet new people who are dealing with the same types of things, and once you decide that, hey, I'm going to respond in a way that's going to, keep me happy and safe and so forth.
Thank you guys for all your wisdom.
You're welcome.
You're very welcome.
You're welcome.
Do we have any other questions?
Of course, no problem.
I'm not able to access the chat. It's a little bit awkward.
I don't
Do we
see
have any
anything
other?
in there. I don't think I don't.
There's
I don't
nothing
see
in there.
yeah.
There's just a couple of messages for Marie, which are really good.
Steph, if
The-
you could put my information in the chat in case Marie wants to connect with me. I would
Sure.
greatly
Well,
appreciate
actually,
that.
I have her email address and she signed up, so I will do that, Jason.
Could you make sure that she gets the honest self-assessment materials?
Yes, I definitely will do that. Yeah, and I just wanted to make a statement. Lori made a comment, which I always direct people to. Visionaware.org is a wonderful organization. They have so many resources and tools to help people, especially people who are aging with vision loss. So that's another one that you might want to seek out for help.
Well, gang, I think this has been a fabulous event. We've covered a lot of ground. And at some point in the future, I hope to do the third key, which is retaining the job or moving up the career ladder.
Well, hopefully I will have retained my job and I would be happy to join you.
I hope so too. Yeah.
I think you will,
yeah.
Yokasta. I have confidence.
Yeah.
You're going to do fabulous.
That makes two of us. Yeah, I think so too.
Thank
Hope
you.
that- I'm hoping
And
that
congratulations.
Yes.
Matthew,
Congratulations.
and you stay in touch. You and I got to do a podcast at some point.
Yes, absolutely.
Jason,
Thank
thank you so much for moderating this discussion. You did a fabulous job. And I also want to thank you, Yokasta and Ken, for being panelists. You guys are both phenomenal. It was such a pleasure to have all of you with us. As we conclude this webinar, I would like to leave you with this wonderful quote that I found from Steve Jobs. It goes, "Your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking, don't settle. As with all matters of the heart, you'll know when you find it." Steve Jobs. And so this concludes this webinar. Thank you all for attending. We hope you've learned and enjoyed this presentation.